This is the 46 of 46 podcast Summit Sessions, where we'll talk all things Adirondack, backcountry, and beyond. From high peak stories and adventures to trail tips and tricks, we'll dive deep into the heart of these mountains and the people who passionately climb them. Adirondack maps and spruce traps, bushwhacks and backpacks. It's all here on the 46 of 46 Summit Sessions. Hello out there and welcome back to the first Summit Session of 2022. I hope you're all having a nice start to the new year. It is currently a balmy -3 today here in sunny Lake Placid, New York. But of course, that is January in the Adirondacks for you. This week, I will, however, be taking it back to much, much warmer days, back when shorts and t-shirts roamed the forest. The start of summer 2021. And if you followed this podcast for a while, you have heard many stories of people's attempts, both successful and unsuccessful, of setting fastest known time records here in the high peaks. And today I will be speaking with Matt Mochella, who set a new unsupported FKT of the 46 high peaks back in June of 2021. And he broke the previous record by over 24 hours at that, completing the entire route unsupported in just under 5 days, starting at the East River Trailhead, the Allen Mountain Trailhead, at 5:50 a.m. on Tuesday, June 22nd, and finishing at the Marble Mountain Trailhead in Wilmington just around 3:45 a.m. Sunday, June 27th. A quick start to the summer for Matt. Very wild stuff. Now, I have heard a lot of people's stories at this point attempting to climb the 46 in one push, and it does really still to this day just amaze me what people can do out there when they make a plan and they just grind. It's very impressive. But today, Matt is going to take us through his route and tell us all about his journey setting the new unsupported FKT of our beloved 46 high peaks. Matt, thanks for coming on the show. Happy to have you.
James, thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here. Now, I've done 5 or 6 episodes by now talking to people about FKT attempts, and both successful and unsuccessful here on the podcast, and I am always completely amazed at the amount of miles people can do in one day, but particularly day after day. I mean, it's wild. And my feet hurt just reading the mileages that you did. So big props to you on what you accomplished out there back in June. But before we get into, talking about the FKT, hit us with a little background on yourself, where you're from, where you grow up, how'd you get into the outdoors, and then ultimately what made you set your sights on this FKT up here in the Adirondacks.
Cool, thanks. So I grew up in southwestern Virginia, kind of in the Blue Ridge Mountains, outside of Roanoke. And, it's a super outdoorsy area, but I wasn't raised particularly like outdoors. I would hike occasionally, and I was generally athletic, but, wasn't like super into it. But anyway, and then I ended up going to college in upstate New York. And then in my last year of college, I had a really formative experience taking a rock climbing class where we took a trip to the Gunks, and it was, I think, just 1 or 2 nights, mostly rock climbing, a little bit of hiking and camping. And that just like totally hooked me. And I was like, oh, I have to like be out in the wilderness more.
Sure.
And so then that was my last year of college. And then so kind of starting my first year of grad school, I started like 2 really new hobbies. One was backpacking and hiking a lot, with more focus, and then also running. And originally those were like completely separate things. Like I said, I'd always been like pretty athletic, but like I'd never done organized runabout sports, and definitely like didn't do track or cross country in high school. So I started running with the running club at Princeton, which was where I went to grad school. And I was just doing like a pretty traditional, I guess, like track cross country style training, although at a much lower, like sub-collegiate level, because I was a new runner at that time. So I was running like 40 miles a week most of the time and battling a lot of overuse injuries. And at the same time, I was doing, trying to go hiking and backpacking as much as I could. And it was actually it was November 2016, which was the fall of my first year of grad school. And I kind of on a whim had just sort of finished the cross country season with the running club and wanted to, do a big trip. So I sort of on a whim went up with just one friend up to the Adirondacks, had absolutely no idea what I was doing. We went up, he just like he'd been up there before, but just, took a back seat and let me sort of plan the trip. And like, I just had no idea what I was doing. I was like, oh, Mount Marcy is the highest peak in this mountain range. So let's go for that. And so we, lugging like 40-pound packs, we parked at the Garden. We went up to Marcy and then down and camped like in Panther Gorge. That was the first day. And then I was looking at the map. I was totally making this up on the fly. And I was like, oh, there's this like nice string of mountain ranges. Or there's this nice string of mountains that goes like right back towards the Garden. So let's just try that. And so day 2, we basically did the Great Range with full packs. Except we didn't get very far because we're carrying 40-pound packs. So, I think we did Haystack and Basin and I think maybe Saddleback. And then we ducked down and camped at one of the lean-tos like down in the Johnsbrook Valley. And then day 3, we went back up and finished the lower Great Range. And then, and then back to the car. And it was just like pure bliss for me. Like I just had the greatest time. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing in like those climbs, especially with a full pack like that. Or it was just completely horrendous, but it was so much fun. And I just knew I had to come back. And it was kind of like after that trip that I started like doing some research online, and I found out about like the 46, the 46er club, and like that, hiking all 46 high peaks is a thing. And so, and I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to do this. And then I think it was, I kind of just continued that same sort of general trend, but I don't think I ever made it up to the Adirondacks the following year. And it was 2 years later, I think in 2018, that I decided I was going to go for a single summer 46 and I was planning to do it over a course of like 4 or 5, I guess 5 different 2 to 3 day backpacking trips, which is still like a pretty ambitious goal.
Definitely. Absolutely.
But, and I spent like tons of time on Caltopo, which I don't know if you know, but it's like an online mapping software.
Sure.
And, so, I spent like all spring. The inception was, it was winter. I was bored. There was a lot of snow. I was cooped up. And so I was like, I gotta plan something for the summer, which happens. This is now sort of like an annual tradition for me. But so I was doing my cabin fever summer planning, and I just like spent like hours and hours on Caltopo, like planning out routes and like looking at like how can I do the most peaks and like a 2 to 3 day backpacking trip and then splitting that up into like 4 or 5 different trips. And and so that was that, and that turned out to be sort of the inception of what became my route for the actual Unsupported FKT. But anyway, so that summer I went solo once, I think, and then I led a few groups of friends, but I was always sort of like the primary, leader of the backpacking trip. I think we did 3 or 4 trips. I didn't get all the peaks, only like I think did like maybe 26 or so. One trip, so let's see, there was one trip I did the Sewards solo, and it was the Sewards the hard way, where I parked at Upper Works, and I was planning to do the Sewards and the Santas. But, I only had one night. And so I full packed all the way out to Sewards and did the Seward Range day 1. Or no, I packed all the way out to Sewards and did Seymour, and then I was toasted. And so that was the end of day 1. And the day 2, I did the rest of like Seward, Donaldson, Emmons and back. And then I was just like completely wrecked by that point. So I just like limped all the way back to Upper Works, and I never got the Santas. So that was one trip. Another trip, we did the Great Range. minus Marcy, plus Sawteeth and that was over that was 2 day, 1 night, with a little bit, it was a little bit smoother than the first time because I like knew what I was getting into. And then we did the Dick's Range, also the hard way, where we went from the AMR parking lot,
okay, sure,
over full pack over Dick's, and then down and camped down, by, is that Elk Lake on the other side of Dick's?
Yep.
And then day 2 was up, finish the Dick's Range, and then back down, and then full pack all the way back over Dick's, to the car. So, we ended up climbing like that full 3,000 feet 3 times when you only really need to do it once.
Yeah, that is not a 3,000 feet climb to take lightly either. That is just up.
It's massive.
Yeah, that's I don't want to do that. I'll flat out say I don't want to do that, but that's pretty wild.
Yeah. So I mean, part of it was, I did these were like, Dick's Range is definitely the hard way to do it, right? And I think part of it was my ignorance of the mountains and like the right way to choose a trip, but also it was I love the climbing. Like I just live for that vertical, and so I was like kind of somewhat intentionally being like, oh, let's do more climbs. Like let's go up and down as much as we can. And okay, so anyway, so that was one summer, and then but sort of towards the end of that summer, before I managed to like really finish the 46, I was starting to get some like issues with my IT band and knee pain, and so I just decided to kind of back off and figured I'd come back and finish it maybe next summer or something. But that never really happened. But then at some point, I just decided like, okay, enough with the single season 46. That didn't work out. I'm just going to go for it all in one push. Like I'm just going to do it. And I was doing some Googling and, found out about the FKT, the unsupported FKT. There's also the supported FKT, which is quite a bit faster. And at that point, I felt like it was a bit out of my wheelhouse to, do it in like 3 days. But I was like, at the time, the FKT was, I think this may have even been before Lucas Weir and Mike Jock did it. So it was the FKT was just from Jan Welford and Corey Delaval, which was like well over 7 days total time. And I was thinking like, oh, like that seemed very approachable to me, naively. And I think I definitely underestimated the difficulty of even doing it in 7 days, 14 hours. But so I started like planning. So I started thinking like, okay, so now instead of 4 to 5 2-day backpacking trips, I'll just do it in one like 7-day push. That was sort of, how I started thinking about it. And training for that, I started doing like, okay, I'm going to need to do like 30, 40 mile hiking days. So I started just like kind of going out every, like once a month basically. And I would do like a huge hiking day, try to get like at least, my goal is to get like at least 10,000 feet of elevation gain, which, usually would be like at least 40 miles, depending on the trails. And so I would just go out and hike, I was just walking for 40 miles. And I realized like, this isn't so bad. And then at some point, kind of around that same time, I also started to realize like that, I started to realize that, hey, I'm really into running. I've been doing this like pretty intense, like track and cross country style road running training. And then I'm really into hiking, and like, what if I combine them and do this like crazy thing called trail running, which I sort of knew about, but I had always for no real good reason decided that trail running wasn't for me. Like I wouldn't like trail running, which is really stupid, because I like running and I like trails. And anyway, so at some point I did start to like combine the two, and I would, instead of doing like a 40-mile walk, which would take me like 18 hours, I did like a 40-mile run, and did it in like 13 hours, which is, still a long time to be out on your feet, and it's higher intensity, but, I covered more ground faster. And then I realized like, okay, so I could do this for the 46. And then all of a sudden, instead of doing, 30 to 40 mile days, I can push to 40 to 50 mile days and bring that FKT down quite a bit. And that brings me about to, where I got to like seriously approaching this FKT, which is about